Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's what we believe, and it's what the author of Hebrews says, and I say yes. Jesus is the same healer of wounds, breaker of barriers, and crosser of boundaries, yesterday, today, and forever. And it is our job as the church and followers of Jesus to work out what this means as the human story within the world evolves. Is Christianity a matter of defending the boundaries erected by our ancestors, which many call true Orthodox Christianity, or is it more about widening the circle of what the church dares to embrace within the inclusive love of the Christ, who knows no boundaries? This story from Mark's Gospel, read to us today by Carrie, who is a wonderful storyteller, boldly expands Jesus' circle of healing love, challenging the barriers and boundaries of his own day and speaking very powerfully to our own times. Simply put, it concerns the healing of the feminine aspect of our humanity. Two female characters represent the opposite ends of the social spectrum. A young 12-year-old daughter of a very powerful man named Jairus, and a poor older woman with a 12-year-old affliction of non-stop menstruation, which makes her untouchable, shunned, and cast out cruelly and hopelessly to the margins of her world. Everything in this story is about barriers and crossing them. Jesus is regarded as dangerous by the religious authorities of both temple and synagogue. We've already heard that in Mark's story. And as a powerful synagogue leader, Jairus risks everything by approaching Jesus on behalf of his daughter. You can imagine his consternation when this lowly countryside rabbi delays their progress towards his home in the midst of the jostling crowd to find out who touched him. At the moment of contact between Jesus and the woman in the crowd, you see, the power dynamics of the story begin to be reversed, because the woman's body is healed, which is what Jesus felt, and which is the complete opposite of what a Jewish audience listening to this story would expect. It is Jesus who should have contracted her impurity through physical touch. She would have made him unclean. In the art of gospel storytelling, every detail is there for a reason, and Mark's aside that the girl was 12 years old is a good case in point. She is on the verge of womanhood, which means fertility and monthly menstruation. In contrast, the bleeding woman has suffered for 12 years permanently infertile. This number, of course, also symbolizes with the 12 tribes of Israel, and thus represents the key to the social meaning of this passage. Within the family of Israel, these daughters represent the advantaged and the impoverished, respectively. They also represent all that is taboo in the culture. Jesus stops to listen to the pain of the excluded woman as she pours out her story. She has been with a flow of blood for 12 years. She has suffered much under the care of many doctors. She has spent all her resources, yet she has not benefited at all, but has grown worse instead. Jesus listens and treats her with compassion and calls her daughter. when the outcast woman is restored to daughterhood, Mark is telling us, can the daughter of the synagogue also be restored to life? You can see this is affecting me, and I want you to keep going, Jamie. It's very, very touching for a daughter to hear this story. It functions to remind the early church and us today of a central characteristic of Jesus' ministry. The last will be first, the least will be the greatest, and the outcast will be brought right into the center. We hear this story today in this year in context of a most extraordinary month in Canada, where our awareness about people on the margins of Canadian society has been raised to a most uncomfortable level. The month began with the discovery of 215 Indigenous children's remains at the site of a former residential school in Kamloops. And then we saw the ghastly massacre of a Muslim family in London. And now the revealing of 751 unmarked graves outside a former Indian residential school in southern Saskatchewan. And all of this within the context of a month when the country was observing Indigenous Peoples Awareness Month, as well as Pride Awareness Month. Speaking about two groups of people that are on the margins of our society. Also, in a time when the memory of the murder of George Floyd is still very raw, we remember it is the UN decade for people of African descent. And all of this is taking place in the month when the United Church of Canada celebrates its birthday on June the 10th, 1925, not even 100 years old yet. I've begun to think of June as the month for acknowledging the incredible human diversity in our world and the month for celebrating our differences. And the biblical image of the rainbow is perfect for it. It represents the inclusion of all creation and God's promise in the story of Noah's Ark never to use violence as a solution again. And when I first saw St. John's banner image of the rainbow flowing out of the empty tomb, I felt its power, and I just assumed that it contained this inclusive and affirmative meaning. When I hear Carrie's story about the umbrella being rejected because it reminded people of pride, it makes me sad. It makes me sad because they'd forgotten the rainbow in the biblical story of Noah. But a lot has changed since then, thank God. We have grown. For these last 96 years since our birth, the United Church of Canada has been going through an often messy process of being reborn into the spirit-filled movement of faithful human beings, following a path of love and inclusion that has been opened up for us by the life of Jesus Christ. It has been a painful yet life-giving process of recognizing that many of the fondly held ideas underlying the founding of our beloved church were rooted in a colonial, patriarchal, racist, sexist, and homophobic worldview that is woven into the very social fabric of the Christianity bequeathed to us. It was practiced lovingly and passed down to us by our forefathers and foremothers in thousands of little ways. A Christianity that raised us, but sadly had very little to do with Jesus Christ, the boundary crosser. We in the United Church have been slowly making our way to the point where we can joyfully embrace the biblical image of the rainbow with all its different meanings. Carrie has donated her fabulous umbrella to St. John's, and I fully intend to use it in as many ways as I possibly can. Lastly, I believe it was the inclusion of women at the very beginning of our church that opened up a 96-year exploration of inclusivity within our church. Gender and gender justice issues have touched every aspect of the ministry and mission of our church, and questions about the place of women in our society tend to do that. They tend to arouse all manner of concerns about marriage and sexuality, family, children, human rights, and all the social justice issues surrounding women and children in our world. We are following in the footsteps of Jesus Christ, the boundary crosser of our story today. I look at all the images of the rainbow, Carrie's umbrella, the banner with the rainbow flowing out of the empty tomb, and I rejoice in the image of wholeness that has been part of the life of this congregation in plain sight for many years, without many realizing it. I called Rudy Plug earlier this week to make sure I was on the right track with my interpretation of the banner. We had a great chat, and he alerted me to a recent column in the Toronto Star about pride written by Reverend Michael Corrin, where he asks the question, what would Jesus do? Simple, he says. Jesus would wave the rainbow flag and march in the parade. So, amen, I say. May it be so. Happy Pride Day, everyone.